Welcome to episode 190 of the Women of the Military podcast. This week, my guest is Tahina Montoya. My biggest takeaway from this episode is how critical asking questions to find your next step forward is. Tahina is currently serving in the Air Force Reserves, and she shares her experience in the military and how she ended up in the reserves. Her path to the military started by joining junior ROTC in high school, mainly because people told her she couldn't do it. Then she learned about ROTC, where she could get her college paid for and commissioned. I really enjoyed getting to talk to Tahina and to hear about her experience as a Latina serving in the military and how that influenced her joining and serving in the military and the career that she had. So let's get started with this interview. Welcome to the show, Tahina. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm very excited. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for being a guest on the Women on Capitol Hill panel. I got a lot of really good feedback, and I'm hoping to do something similar in the fall. And so hopefully that will happen. It was a great episode and so much good feedback. So
yeah, it was really exciting to be here, and I'm excited to be back. So excited, very excited to be back.
So let's start with, why did you decide to join the military?
I know a lot of my colleagues and friends have said like they've always wanted to join the military. That was not necessarily my case because I first generation Colombian American, so I don't have any other family members that currently serve. And so for me, it was a kind of an act of defiance. I went to sign up for high school and I saw that there was I was reading through options and signing up for classes, and I saw that there was a gym option, and I had never heard that there was any alternative for gym. But in my high school, Lowell High School in Massachusetts, giving a quick shout out, I saw that there was the option to do ROTC or band, or I think it was culinary. And so I started asking, I was like, what is junior ROTC? And every answer I got was, oh, you're too girly, or there's no way you can do that, or you're too Latina, or you're too feminine, or too whatever. So I checked it out of defiance to kind of prove people wrong, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. And it just grew into something unexpected. It was something that fit me really well. And as someone whose parents couldn't afford college and whose parents were very clear and very, very open about their inability to help me through college, it also provided the opportunity to get a scholarship. I ended up getting a 4-year Air Force scholarship to go to Norwich, and then commissioned at the end of that. And so very unexpected. And it all started out of trying to prove someone wrong.
I love that. It kind of shows your character from the beginning of you can't do this? Yes, I can. Just watch me.
Yeah. But I mean, way easier said than done. So sometimes I was like, what am I doing? A lot of times, actually.
That's true. Yeah. Sometimes it's I'm going to prove you wrong. And then it's oh, this is a lot harder than I thought. So did you have a mentor who helped you? Because some people who do JROTC, which is odd, they don't find out about the ROTC program in general, and they end up enlisting just because they weren't given not the right guidance, but they weren't given all the options by their leadership. So how did you find out about ROTC for college?
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because I'm still very involved with my junior ROTC unit. And that's also a common theme that I've noticed, that a lot of them understand the concepts of serving the military and are very well versed in the history and everything. But when it comes to understanding the differences between enlisted and being officer, it is kind of a murky route, right? Distinction, because we're both serving, but in different capacities. And so for me, it was Chief Bobby Jocks, who was part of the ROTC program. And I knew that I wanted to go to college. And I was very clear and very, very open about I want to go to college. I don't know how I'm going to pay for it, but this is what I want to do. And it was, I think it was a combination of him seeing my commitment to the program and knowing how committed I was to going to college, that he kind of explained to me the officer route that, again, I had no idea was something available to me. So it was through his guidance and affording me the opportunity to ask questions, and then not being afraid to ask questions, which someone from a Latino background, we're not necessarily taught to ask questions. We're taught to respect our elders and to be mindful and just to keep quiet and stay out of trouble. And so, again, I was kind of different in that I was not afraid to ask questions. And so asking questions kind of opened all these unexpected doors for me.
Yeah, I love that. Asking questions, it's such good advice, especially when you're joining the military, because there's so much. Even people in the military don't know all the things.
Right. Or it's easy to understand not wanting to ask questions, right? Because you don't want to be that person. But I've also had, to your point, like a lot of friends and colleagues who kind of like signed a lot of stuff and have committed themselves to things without fully understanding what that commitment entailed, and in a multiple of like a whole spectrum of things. And so I totally have become that annoying person that asks the questions, but I'm okay. I feel comfortable in that space, and I will encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, that's great advice. So you got an Air Force ROTC scholarship and you went to Norwich University. So what was that experience like?
For multiple reasons, the demographic in Northfield, Vermont is not as diverse as, let's say, where I grew up, which was Lowell, Massachusetts. And in Lowell, they have representatives or people from 62 different countries, so really, really diverse. And not only because it's Vermont, which is really, really cold, colder than I expected, but then also because it's a military school in Vermont, like that demographic was significantly less diverse than what I grew up in. And all that to say, so I felt a little bit out of my comfort zone and naturally clinged to, friends that are still my best friends today, which was a Dominican, Stacy Pichardo, who's now a lawyer in Boston, and then Dilfuza Sanginova, a Russian-born, Tajikistan-raised foreign exchange student who had no idea what she was getting herself into, and like handful of other diverse folks, right? Like I just naturally gravitated to those of us, and it was like a group of 5 of us. But I do think it was like I myself wanted to go there. And it was because, again, the challenge aspect and proving people wrong, showing people that, Latinas can be strong-minded and can join the military and can become officers. And I think it was what I needed at the time. I needed the space to grow, the space away from my family, to face challenges, but in a safe environment, comparatively speaking. And I think it was the right step for me in preparing me for the military, given how little I knew about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about diversity from someone who's white and went to a school that was primarily white people. And like, I never really thought about how much of an impact that would have and how much more challenging it would be to go to school when you like don't really like you feel out of place. I mean, I feel kind of out of place at college anyways, and then to add that extra layer. So it's really interesting to hear your experience, and it's why it's so important that we have like the diversity of people sharing their stories, because you feel awkward, you can hear your story and know that they're not alone in how they feel.
Yeah, and that feeling of not necessarily feeling like you fit in is something that allows you to relate to other people in different capacities, right? Like we recognize we're all different, but the fact that we all feel different is in itself a commonality. And so, but yes, to your point, and I definitely don't want to belabor it on too much, but there was one instance where I genuinely almost got in big trouble at Norwich because there was someone who said that I threatened her and said that I had family members in the FARC that were after her. And I was like, that is the most obscene and ridiculous thing. And talk about stereotypes, right? That you're assuming because I'm Colombian that I would be involved in some kind of something ridiculous like the FARC, or that I would have family members and that I would threaten you with that. And so, and not pointing fingers in any particular direction, because thankfully nothing came of it. But like the fact that that was an allegation that was taken seriously and that they were looking into it was ridiculous. And similar to that, when I went to commission, Montoya is a very popular name in Colombia. It's like the Smith, if you will, like a Smith. And the number 2 drug lord at the time happened to be Montoya, and he got caught. And so then it was a big delay in getting my clearance and possibly not being able to commission over the speculation that I could have been related to him. And so it's like little stereotypes like that came from, I guess, being in a less diverse demographic area.
Yeah, and why those biases really matter. Like maybe they don't matter to most people, but they do matter to the people who are being affected by the situations. And not just like a small thing, like had someone been like, well, you have the same last name, so you have to be related, and like pulled your clearance, that would have like...
It would have been the end of that. Yeah, not only clearance, but like loss of scholarship. You have to repay that money back. Not being able to join the military. And so there's a lot of implications from buying into stereotypes and biases. So definitely.
So luckily everything worked out and you were able to commission. Where was your first assignment? Where did you get to go?
So my first assignment after training was Tyndall Air Force Base in Tampa. So definitely not a hard assignment, if you will, supporting heavy ops. So mostly KC-135s, unit level ops. So really in support of pilots as they prepared to fly. And so that was and from there I deployed twice. And so really, it was a really good experience as like my first assignment to really get a feel for, quote, the real Air Force, I guess you could say. And, but again, also lots of eye-opening experiences in that it was all very new to me on multiple levels. So.
And where did you deploy to? You said you deployed twice.
Yeah. So to Qatar and then Kyrgyzstan.
And were you like a maintainer? I don't really understand.
Sorry, I should have been more specific. So an analyst, so Intel by trade. And so it was a lot of like just prepping them for missions to Afghanistan and Iraq at the time, and just making sure that they were aware of threats and knew what to do in the event that something happened.
Yeah, Intel is a high ops, high deployment job.
Yeah, but I will say, so it also afforded me the opportunity to get exposed to international humanitarian efforts, I guess you can say. I've always been something that I'm very thankful to my parents for. One of the many things is that they always taught me to the importance of giving back to the community. And so for me, up until that point, it was very much so in Lowell, like the community that helped me get to the military and through college. But it was during my deployment to Kyrgyzstan where I was able to volunteer as a humanitarian coordinator. And it allowed me not only the opportunity to get off base, but it allowed me to see how easy it is to make a positive impact in the communities around you. And I left that deployment not only getting a good sense of what my job was professionally, but understanding how little acts of kindness can really make a difference and how it doesn't take much effort to make such positive impact. As an example, like on base, they were throwing away, due to the constant rotation, they're always throwing away these mattresses. And it was like, I want to say like within a year or two, they would be throwing away these perfectly good mattresses. And so as a humanitarian coordinator, I was matched up with a town in Vasilyevka, if I remember that correctly, in Kyrgyzstan. And when I first visited there, I recognized that it was pure winter. It's really, really cold. And that a lot of people were sleeping on the floor. And so again, not afraid to ask questions, I went on base and, because it was a big transit hub, the community of people who actually were there were very small. And I just started asking questions like, what happens to these mattresses? Is it because they're not good? Or is it because, I found out that there's a policy that by law, you have to change those mattresses out frequently. And so I was like, well, if they're still good and you guys are just going to throw them away, if I find a truck, would you be opposed to like just giving them to the village? And obviously some coordination had to happen, but the village provided the truck and the base ended up donating over 200 mattresses to the village. And so little things like that. And so, no one lost money. No one had to give money. It was just asking questions and not being afraid of hearing no, which thankfully in that case, it ended up being a yes. So little things like that. I got a taste of that humanitarian effort piece, which really, really grew on me a lot and has really stayed with me throughout.
Yeah, I can relate to that because when I was in Afghanistan, I saw the need and I wanted to find a way to help people who were outside of the United States because it kind of like changed my worldview by leaving the country and going overseas and seeing. And I'm a really big fan of microlending, and I use Kiva a lot for microlending because they do loans across the world where you can support. And I love they have the feature that you can focus directly on women and then do loans. So we always support women who are trying to start businesses around the world. And I pick different countries based on like certain events that are happening. And it's a really great program. So
cool. I'm not big on the finance piece, so micro lending and all that stuff, not terms I'm familiar with, but that sounds awesome. That sounds really, really cool.
Yeah, sometimes they're no interest loans, sometimes they are interest related loans, but people band together and give $25 and then they give them whatever amount they're asking for and then they pay back the loans, and they have like a 98% repayment track record. So all the money that we donate, we get 98% of it back and then we redonate it out. So it's just like a continual cycle of giving more money and then re-lending the money that we've already given.
I think that's so amazing because, again, something so little can mean so much for someone else. I'm not saying that $25 is not a lot, but it can mean a lot more to someone else. And so that's exactly an example of what I was saying. Like, it's little things. And there's especially nowadays with how interconnected we all are, there are so many ways to go about that. And it doesn't necessarily require going beyond your means or beyond your capacity. It's just finding unique ways to offer help to different communities. So I think that's awesome. I'm going to look into that.
Yeah, and I'll link to it in the show notes. It's Kiva, KIVA.org. They're a great organization. And I know there's other micro-lending organizations. That's just who we started with. And so we've been giving with them. And I was at Manus as a transient. And so like the fact that they rotate out the mattresses, it makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah, that's probably why, but you'd be surprised. A lot of the mattresses, at least from what I saw, a good handful of them still had the plastic on them, like to make them last longer. And so, but then at the end of the day, and I was very transparent when giving it to the community and let them know that they're not new, that they're used, but that they were lightly used. And when they're in circumstances where it's like sleeping on a cold floor or like a mattress, like clearly they're going to be more willing to accept them. And so and we did something similar with coats for the winter. So it was really, really rewarding experience that kind of like once you get stung by the international humanitarian bug, like that's a lot of people stay there. And that's kind of been at the core of what I love to do as well.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we can do at home, but there's also a lot of stuff we can do internationally. So it's nice to have the balance of doing both. So that was your first assignment was Tyndall. And then what happened next?
Actually, in Kyrgyzstan, I've always wanted to, at least one of my goals while serving has always been leveraging my cultural and language capabilities to kind of propel Air Force mission in whatever capacity. And so I always wanted to do the counter-narcotics piece mission specifically to counter the stereotypes that I had to fight while growing up and to fight against the stereotype. And so in Kyrgyzstan, I was offered the opportunity, like the volunteer opportunity to give the J2 at the time a tour, like the incoming J2 to Afghanistan, a tour of the spaces. And I said yes, which another tidbit, never take down a volunteer opportunity. You never know what doors it's going to open. And so I went ahead and I gave her the tour. And during lunch, she asked me, she was like, so what do you want to do? And so I go into this long-winded spiel, which is very Tahina-like. And I'm just like, well, I know I can't do it until I'm blah, blah, blah. She's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to work counter-narcotics. And at that point, I only thought counter-narcotics was in Southcom, which is Miami. And we kind of left it at that. And she forward deployed to Afghanistan. And I happened to be on the VML that summer, like as I was there. And all of a sudden there was a by name request for me to go to join an interagency task force South, working counter-narcotic missions, but it was in Key West, Florida. And I was like, there's an Air Force job in Key West, Florida? Like, and it's counter-narcotics and it's a captain. So I don't even have to wait until I'm what is going on? And so like, I obviously jumped on that in like a split second. Like, I don't even think I thought about it too much. I was single at the time, so there wasn't much to think about. And again, opening doors, right? And not being afraid to ask questions or take opportunities, or at least it's okay to be afraid with them, but don't stop yourself from trying to see what happens. But, and so, yeah, it was from there that I got stationed at Key West and working the counter-narcotics piece, working on the operations floor, 24/7 ops. And towards the end of my assignment there, I was the interpreter, the translator for the J5. So I was able to travel all throughout Central and South America, kind of translating for the J5. So I started off at the watch floor and slowly throughout the years built up very slowly. And I ended up being kind of like their interpreter and traveling with them. And so that was really cool. And the added cool piece, talking about breaking stereotypes, is I was, towards the end of that, I was pregnant with my first son. And the J5, who was a Marine, Caucasian Marine, I was like, sir, like, I'm pregnant, but I still want to do this. Like, can I please go? And I was like, I understand, like, if you don't want, he's like, no. He's like, can you do it? And I was like, yes. He's like, do you want to do it? I'm like, yes. And he's like, then come. And so he let me do it until I could not fly anymore. And the faces of the high-ranking officials in Central and South America seeing a Latina Air Force officer who was pregnant stroll in with a J5 Marine Corps colonel was fabulous. I loved it. I lived for that. It was so awesome to, without even having to say anything, being able to like shift the conversation or like just shift the narrative and have them think twice about what women can and cannot do. And it was great. It was great. And so I was very thankful for that opportunity and that experience.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's awesome that you had the support of your leadership so that you could do that. And you said you met your husband. So how did you meet your husband?
I met him there at JED South. So we were coworkers. And so, yeah, I was on the watch floor and there was rumors. I mean, Key West is small. It's an island. And so it's a lot small. It's a very small community. So there was whisperings of whenever new people were going to be coming on. And he hates that I tell this story, by the way. And so like I had heard that there was like a Latino officer coming through and there was, talks about that, but I was very much so, which is, talking about struggles. And I will gladly talk about my struggles, but that was one of those phases where I was very much so struggling. If I'm being like in retrospect, being very honest with myself, I think it was at a time where almost too much change was happening. So it was nonstop deployments, back-to-back long-term deployments. And with that trip to Afghanistan, I came back from a deployment with my orders to go to Key West, which was awesome, but they gave me less than 2 months to get back, get situated and figure out, and then out process and then pack everything up and then go back. And then it was straight to 24/7 ops. And so it was, and added bonus of I was in a relationship at that time that I was very convinced was going to be someone that I was going to be, the person I was going to be marrying. And all that to say, it was a struggle. It was a big struggle that I think a lot of factors contributed to that. And a lot of that it was almost like too much change, like whatever that threshold is. I think we each have different thresholds and I had hit my threshold. And so to get back to your question, like I was not in a place to try to meet somebody at all. And it was the bottom, like for multiple reasons, it was at the bottom. I did not care to meet anyone. And so I had heard, but I was very much in my misery space, if you will. And I heard that he was Latino and I challenged him. I'm like, but how Latino are you? I was like, you're saying you're Latino, but like, what are you talking about? And so then he started talking to me in Spanish and I found out he was Colombian. And I was like, wow, not too many Colombian officers in the US military that also speak Spanish. And so we just naturally had a lot of things in common. And one thing happened, one thing led to the other, and then we got married. But back to the struggle piece is, yeah, that's one of the many phases of my military career where there was a struggle. And I think, as I reflect, as I'm in a point of transition, I'm, as to whatever happens after the military, I'm like, did I, I know there's people that struggled like very badly or like really had some traumatic experiences. And I would never say that I experienced what some of those people did. And I would never try to equate my struggles to other people's struggles. And so I want to put it out there that when I talk about my struggles, I'm not trying to say that my struggles are worse or better or different than anyone else's, but I would also make a case for, I think many service members struggle continuously throughout different phases of their military career. As you and I were talking a little bit before, like when I first joined, the struggle was I was the first family member, still am the first family member and in my family to be in the military. So lots of changes there and lots of firsts and kind of like going to uncharted territory. Then it was dealing with imposter syndrome, which I still deal with. And then it was this phase that we're currently talking about where it was a mental health stint. And I want to say, I think this is the first time like I'm talking about it because there's still that stigma that I would like to convince myself that I'm not like, oh, I know that we're beyond that stigma, but it was very much so. I reached out to, I was going through all those changes and I reached out to my supervisor at the time and said like, hey, I don't know what's happening, but I don't feel like myself. And the response was like, you're fine. You're fine. You're good. You're going to be fine. You're good. It's just, you're on the watch floor, but it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And then, some time passed with no action on my supervisor's part, but me still not feeling great. And so I went to his boss's boss. So like my boss's boss. And I said, it happened to be an Air Force officer, and an added layer of complexity is it's a joint environment. So like you have multiple chains of command. So who are you supposed to go to and who do you trust when you're new? And I myself couldn't understand what I was going through. So how am I supposed to vocalize and communicate what I'm feeling. And so I went to the Air Force major at the time, and I was like, hey, I'm not feeling like myself. I'm not sure like what's going on. And it was to the point where I was like holding it together at work. But the minute I would walk through the door, it was tears, consistently crying all day. And then I would get it back together, and then I would go back into the office and figuring it out. And it wasn't until a civilian coworker caught me being a hot mess in the car, like completely breaking down in my car. And she's like, Tahina, you need help. And it was kind of that point where honestly, the embarrassment was what led me to actually like put my foot down and say, I need help. But it quickly catapulted. And I'm saying this hopefully for whatever, if someone's out there who's like in charge of people, it quickly catapulted into me trying to reach out for help to address what I was going through that I myself could not put my finger on. And it turned into Tahina's suicidal and she needs help, and like having 24-hour supervision and going up to Patrick Air Force Base. And it took it to a whole new level where I felt this incredible loss of control. I felt like my whole entire career was on the line because I spoke up and said I wasn't feeling like myself. And I can delve into like what that turned into. They were trying to mandate to put me on meds. And I told them, I was like, look, I understand that. And I respect you. And I respect your, like that you're an expert in your field. I am telling you, I do not need medication. I just need a pause. I need a break. I need to talk to someone to sort through my deployments and coming back from a deployment and breaking up with someone that I thought was going to be in my life for a lot longer and moving. And that's what it took. It took me having a civilian therapist to like talk through my issues. And that's all I needed. I wasn't suicidal. I didn't need any medication, but it turned into like a tornado of stuff that quite honestly made my situation at the time significantly worse. Like everyone was being more hurtful than helpful because they were just not listening to what I was trying to communicate. And I know we veered off very much so from your original question of how I met my husband, but you can see how clearly I was not in the place to be meeting anyone. And so, yeah, that's a very long answer to your question.
Yeah, but it talks about how important it is to listen to people, because when I got home from my deployment, I was like, I just feel like something's off. And the therapist was like, well, you just got home. You'll be fine. And like, instead of saying, well, why don't we like talk about why you feel this way, they just brushed it off and were like, you're fine. You just got home from a deployment. Wait a few months and it'll be okay. And because she told me I was fine, I never went and got help. And I often think about like how that conversation could have went so differently if someone had just listened to me and been like, I just feel like there's something off and I don't know what it is. And like, I couldn't even put it into words. And it wasn't until years later, I got counseling through Cohen Veteran Networks, and I was able to talk to someone and just go through some of the struggles that I had. And I think that's what we need to like listen to people, because the military throws so many hard things at you: deployments, moving, like living far away from your family, all these things that like most people don't have to deal with any of them. And then you have to deal with all of them while you're trying to live your life and do your high ops job. And I think that's why mental health is so important, and why it's so important we listen to people.
Yeah. And I think one of the, and it was scary. It was so scary to do what I'm about to say, but I advocated for myself. And so there was a lot of people, even though I was very scared by it, but there was, like I said, they wanted to put me on medication. They were saying that I was suicidal. And I repeatedly had to tell them like, no, that's not the case. They also, at Patrick, they wanted me to see a therapist, but on base. And given my clearance, I refused to. And I guess within specific parameters, I'm not saying like go completely left field, but don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, because ultimately you know what you need. And so I told them, I was like, look, I'm telling you, I need to talk to somebody, and I'm only willing to talk to somebody if they're off base. So I was able to get a civilian therapist through the Family Readiness Center. And I was also hesitant. I went there and I didn't want to talk. And she's like, you know what? I just need you to show up. You don't have to talk. We can sit here for a whole hour and you don't have to say a thing. I'm hoping that eventually you grow comfortable with me, where you know that you can trust me and that nothing's going to leave this room. And eventually I hope that you're going to get to a place where you're going to call to cancel my appointments because you don't need me anymore. And once I gained her trust, that's exactly what happened. At like the fourth session, I would call to like reschedule, or I would call to like cancel. And to her, instead of being like trying to convince me to go, she saw that as a sign of me getting better. And it also gave me tools to really process stress and anxiety and grief in ways never expected. So I really took that very, very stressful time and I grew so much as a person from it. But to your point, it could have gone a multitude of different ways. And so don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, because ultimately you genuinely know what is going to be best for you and what you need to feel better and to get better.
So true. Yeah. And I did an interview with Cohen Veterans Network, and they're a great organization that supports active duty, military dependents, and then even people who are not military dependents, but they're connected to the military, parents